Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining us again, just on cue when it started to rain. It's actually my pleasure to make this short announcement before this interview. We've been in some, as a company, Talent Innovation has been speaking to HR Grapevine quite a lot with Callum and Tom. We've actually been selected to work in partnership with HR Grapevine, arguably Europe's leading HR magazine.
It's not an argument. It's not an argument.
No argument. These are the facts we've established. And this evening you're actually privy to the very first article. This is the first of an ongoing article called Ask Elva. Elva will become the go-to expert, which that she already is, for every HR department, every HR individual across Europe. And we will encourage people to write in and ask questions of Elva, to which she will answer perfectly with uber precision. So this evening I would welcome any questions from the audience that you may have. Please just put your hand up and we will address those questions. And if I can, I will get this microphone to you. If not, I would encourage you to speak up so we can hear you, and you may well be published. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Callum and Elva for the inaugural Ask Elva.
I think it's very appropriate that Freud talks about ego because, he's saying that the people in the audience will get published, and some of you are like, oh yeah, published, and then others are like, oh no, published. So it'll be interesting to see who actually asks some questions, but I do encourage you to, because as we say, this is the first ever Ask Elva, so you get to live Ask Elva, which is good. So I'm Callum Dilietto, the editor of HR Grapevine magazine, the best HR publication, as Mike said there. And I think it seems appropriate to kick off, obviously, at the book launch, to talk a little bit about your book.
Yeah.
You said that you've kind of been inundated by questions here, there and everywhere, but we've got everyone in one room, so you can just answer all those questions in one go, rather than having to have the same conversation many times. So just tell us, from very briefly, let's not go too in depth with it, but from beginning to end, how did this project come about and the end result?
Well, I guess the starting point was, first of all, I failed to write a book. So that was 3 years ago. I wrote half a book, 35,000 words later. There were 35,000 words on a file in a computer. So that was that.
Great way to start.
But then I got really clear that I wanted to write a book about 360. That was the book I wanted and needed to write. That was the one that people kept saying, have you got that in handouts? Have you got that written down? And I kept saying, oh, well, no. So this was clearly the book I needed to write. And I was introduced to Mindy Gibbons-Klein, the book midwife. And Mindy has the most fantastic structure and lots of experience of working with first authors. And she said, I know how you can do it, Elva. Just do what I say. And you'll write the book. So that's exactly what I did, just about, yeah? Coaching. It's otherwise known as coaching. Sorry, it's called coaching. And the process was a 90-day process. It was planning the whole piece and then 90 days of writing. And then, in fact, it took about 9 months of doing all the tricky bits after that, actually, which was much harder than I ever thought it was going to be. And I really give a lot of thanks to my sister Jo, I can see you, who did lots of work with the graphics in the book, which were very tricky, and we just wanted to illustrate everything. So we wanted lots of visual stuff. So that was the journey.
Well, it's a fantastic finished product.
Yeah.
And I think what's great is, obviously, earlier people were talking about how there's a sense of you in it. It's not just facts and figures. There's Elva in there as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's important when you're writing a book, to actually put yourself in there. And of course, you've got your HR experience has helped to add to that. You've got your psychology experience.
Yes.
Everything is sort of merged together and created this publication.
Yeah.
So, in your experience,
yes.
What have you found, or what do you think at the moment is important or the future even from speaking to some of your clients?
Well, it's interesting because I talk to a lot of my clients about how to support them with new projects or making this impact, or really giving value to the business that they're in. And I think the main thing that I can see is that there's a very exciting time now. The coaching skill has emerged and is really embedding, and there is an understanding about how that works. But I think the next step is really for HR to own that position as holding the mirror. And actually I love Amelia's, mirrors going around, and I hadn't seen it quite like that before, but I can really see that actually HR can really own that. My job is to hold the mirror, and I'm going to judge very carefully and responsibly how I hold it, and take good care of how I'm doing that. But that's my job, to hold the mirror, and then connect that strongly to the business. And there's nothing to be worried about in terms of business value if you do that.
Well, psychology and HR, I think, are very closely connected.
Yeah.
There's without a doubt.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that being here in Freud's house,
Yeah.
and the parallels that Amelia drew earlier, and then they all seem to link to your book. So it's perfect.
amazing.
It's come full 360. Now, obviously, on the invite, you promised something to everyone, and I think this is a big claim, because Elva quite nonchalantly said, "Oh, I've got 7 easy steps to make HR, easy," and that's a big claim.
Mm-hmm.
But you've said it now, so could you take us through it? 7 steps, HR easy, done. There you go.
Okay, cool.
So
Okay, let's start at the beginning.
no pressure.
So number one, do you want number one? Okay, number one is find a champion, someone who really you can work with, who can be on your side, who you can absolutely work. You can deliver what they want, and they can really value what you're doing, and work with them. Really, sort of relish that relationship.
And is that tying in with, I guess, the top team and the CEOs and the board's attitude to HR? Well,
the champion might be in the top team. It'd be great if it were.
Yeah.
But it isn't always the case. So you might have to find a champion elsewhere in the first place.
Obviously, there are some HR people in here, L&D people as well. Do you feel that you have a champion? No pressure if you don't want to sort of house them. I'm getting some nods here, some encouraging nods.
There's always champions, and I think that's an important point, that it doesn't always, you don't have to look at hierarchy. You can just look at champions in the broader sense, which might be lower levels, but actually have a lot of leadership presence and a lot of credibility, and they can start to create a bit of momentum. Totally agree.
Well, it's the funny thing, isn't it, is that everyone says that people are the most important asset of a business. It's a very well-rehearsed phrase. But do you feel that it's really, truly being embedded in organisations? You don't have to say your own organisations, but
Well, the answer to that is no. And this is from somebody who's had 40 plus years in corporate life. And I would say that if you haven't, as an HRD, done a mind melt with your chief executive, then your HR function just becomes an administrative function, and you don't have the power, you don't have the gravitas, and you don't get that momentum. So if you don't report to the chief executive and you don't have that mind melt, then you, as an organisation or as an HR function, gets taken out, which is why most HR functions have been taken out, and they're just admin functions. You've got that split between what the OD people are trying to do, and then those who just run the processes. And I was having a conversation with some very interesting women before this. My own view is an HR director has to now be that OD specialist, because that's the way forward in an organisation, because you can actually outsource most of the transactional stuff.
totally agree. I wouldn't dare go against my previous HR director. Did you notice a bit in the book, Catherine, that I talked about you? I might have edited it out.
No, I haven't seen that yet.
Ah, well,
She's going to be reading it frantically now. Where am I? So step 2.
Step 2, I have to put my glasses on. So, when you're faced with a tricky HR issue, is that your handbag, Mike? So, when you're faced with a tricky HR issue, rather than trying to solve it, you could start with an inquiry. And actually launch an inquiry, and you'll solve it through the inquiry. So you can see the inquiry process as the method of solution.
So sometimes asking questions rather than trying to answer them.
Exactly, and creating a process where those questions are asked and answered by those who most need to know the answers, rather than you yourself.
Yeah.
That's the clever bit.
Good. What do people think of that? Yeah. It's just those confident agreeing over there. I can see it. Good. Step 3.
Step 3 is own a clear accountability for some key strategic processes, but the rest, make sure the line are accountable. So the sort of things I'm talking about is things like it might be how you're identifying potential leadership for your pipeline, for instance, or So so it's a matter of not just maintaining control of everything, because that becomes very transactional and unwieldy and takes it away from the line who are always then resisting you. So it's about giving the accountability absolutely in the line where they're, it's their job to do the recruiting and the hiring and the firing and the managing of performance, but to hold the very, very business critical processes that no one line manager will hold, except for you, which is perhaps back to your point about OD, actually.
The relationship between HR and line managers, I think, is a funny one.
It is.
I'm sure there's going to be a few. There's already agreements, and they're like, yes, it is. Yes, it is. There's this weird responsibility shuffle, I think,
Yes.
where line managers are saying, oh, that's HR, and then HR are saying, well, actually, line managers should be doing that. How do people in the audience feel about this sort of push and shove? Is there anyone that would like to comment on that? Yes. I'll pick on people. I will. I don't mind. I think where's the happy medium, really? Because obviously that's your step. But how do you? You talked about making sure that you don't take too much away from the line, but how do you also give them what they're supposed to do as well?
I think it's about clear, powerful communications with the line and not letting them get away with stuff, actually. And it starts right at the top with that relationship with the chief executive. It's very easy for a business to blame HR for things not working quite right. And it's about really being firm and holding back on that. That's one of the key parts.
What's your next step?
Next step. Check that your followers are inspired and wowed, really, are they excited about what you're doing? Are they? And if they're not, they quite often aren't, right? If they're not, then change what you're doing and do something that will inspire and wow your followers. So this is all around, you being a leader in the business, with your followers in your own direct team, but the line managers as well. So stop what you're doing if it's not inspiring people. Do something that does inspire them.
And how do you do that? How do you, if there's someone in the audience and they're thinking, oh, actually, do you know what, my followers aren't that wowed.
Yeah.
How do you get that?
How do you get that? Well, the first step is about holding the mirror.
Back to the mirror.
Telling the truth and declaring, do you know what? I think this could be better, or maybe we're missing something. And I think the where you need courage is to say, this could, we could do something better here. And it's very easy for you, you say, oh, I'm going to do 360, or I'm going to do this leadership program, and you've got to see it right the way through to the end because that's what you said. And when actually what there is to do is to say, no, let's stop, let's regroup, let's do something that actually is going to properly engage everyone. This isn't quite right. It takes a lot of courage.
What's step? We're on 5? We're on 5?
If you're stuck, with the project, then connect it more closely with the business. If it's not moving, if it's not, like, there isn't the energy. People, if you're finding people aren't turning up for your events or they're not participating in 360, then what there is to do is look at adding in the business drive. So you might need to stop and regroup, but all you might need to do is just put in that business focus. So again, it's about stopping and reflecting and getting it better.
Every HR director I speak to, that's the number one thing they say. It's got to connect to the business.
Yeah.
It needs to be business relevant. Your
Yeah.
business first. I feel that a lot of HR individuals understand that, but it's actually doing it, actually connecting it to the business that people struggle with. How can people help to do that?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what people think about that. And understanding the business is so important and difficult.
Yes.
I was about to say, I think that the role of the HR professional has become much more one of a strategist, because if you don't speak the language of strategy, there's a danger that people don't engage. And I was with an organisation today, and what was really interesting was in a meeting with the chief exec and the director of HR, she was constantly having to retranslate what she was trying to achieve into the strategy, or how it linked with the strategy of the business. And I find that as HR professionals, you have to constantly check back that they're not reinventing what you're trying to push forward as an initiative. And 360, interestingly, sometimes has the impact, I've noticed, at senior level of causing an issue of almost scapegoating. They see it as a means of scapegoating as opposed to, actually, let's look at what's going on and how it can impact positively on us moving forward. So I think it's become more complex.
The language barrier, I think, is quite an interesting one. It is a language barrier, because if you think of sort of CFOs and CEOs often come from a finance background, so they're in that same language bubble. And then HR comes along and they're saying, oh, talent management and coaching, and they're like, okay, I was talking about numbers, so
Yes, talk about bottom line.
Exactly. So people struggle.
Yeah, they do.
And is it something that you see that's improving? Or?
I don't know if it's improving, but what I do see is that if you spend some time in a different type of role in your career, I think I see huge differences. So the clients that I work with, where they've been out of HR and come back in, that makes a huge difference. So the lateral moves in and out of HR, I think, is what, as a profession, we should be encouraging, to be honest. I mean, I've learned so much from running my own business. Flipping heck, if only I'd understood some of those things when I was in HR, I could have really been so much more powerful in how I connected and, influenced people. So a chance of just, having a sales target for 6 months, just do it. Find some way of just being in that position, and you'll be bigger and better in HR.
Yeah, completely agree. Our penultimate tip to make
Penultimate tip is be the mirror with no agenda. Now that's very hard, because you all have views, right, about how your business should be running, how the culture should change, and I think this is the trickiest thing. Because you'll be approaching the senior people with that opinion in mind, and actually that's it. Freud has his opinions, I'm sure, but that's the way that you'll get people resisting. You won't get the change happening if you've got that opinion. It's one of those that's not the right word. I don't know. One of those tricky things.
Yeah,
it's one of those tricky things. Yes, exactly. So to be the mirror with no agenda, you could be more powerful.
I think one of the problems, Elva, is that as soon as you say be the mirror without an agenda, it sounds like you don't have an opinion. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's not the best way to move forward at all, because a mirror is a lens of looking at things, and it's about understanding the different lenses and then drawing that together.
Yes.
So I think actually HR should be more pushy, more focused, more energetic, and it is about what you're saying about language, because you need to have the business language. Ultimately, when a CFO says, what I want to know is, are those numbers going to match? with the CEO, what he's saying is, it is mainly him, unfortunately, is what are we going to deliver? How are we going to deliver that? And is the output going to happen? And until HR focuses on outputs and results and less on inputs, we're not going to make a significant difference.
Do you find it difficult, and this is an open question to yourself and the audience, in terms of certain areas of HR, especially learning and development, it's much harder maybe to justify the ROI in that it could maybe sometimes be, you know, if you're talking about pipelines and maybe slow burning training and development and things like that, is it easy to then get that buy-in and say, well, you know, in 5 years' time we're going to be better for it? And they're thinking, well, I don't really, you know, do people struggle with that?
I think it's a challenge. So in one organisation, I was an OD practitioner for 7 years, and I've just joined a new organisation. I've just joined the Prince's Trust. And the Prince's Trust is a relatively new organisation. It's 40 years old. And 5 years ago, they didn't have a learning and development team. So this world is really new to them. And so HR is a relatively, so very much what you were saying, it is just it feels like an administrative function. So me as an OD practitioner trying to bring in some OD practices, it's really, really difficult, because actually some of the benefits of OD work you're not going to see instantly. You know, it's going to be in 12 months' time, in 18 months' time. And that is a really difficult sell for an organisation that is hugely, and rightly so, interested in numbers and bottom line. So it is a really difficult culture change to make, but it's a really important one, because ultimately it's what's going to make the difference in terms of us being a organisation that is focused on people. Because I do think, you know, ultimately that's what we care about as an organisation. We're just not very good at saying it or doing it right now, but this is what's going to change it. You know, that OD practice is what's going to change that.
Do you think it's the route into HR that may be a problem as well? I know, I would say the vast majority of HR directors at the moment that I speak to often say, I fell into HR. And often a few people have said, oh, I was doing this, and then someone said, oh, you're quite good with people, why don't you do some HR? I don't know if that rings any bells with anyone in the audience, but is that possibly a problem in that they're not looking at someone to say, oh, you're business-minded, you're strategic, maybe you should go into HR because people are really important to our business?
But you turn that around. HR people should be strategic. Yes. They should have those skills. You know, the CIPD has been banging on about this, but it's having those skills. It's having that face-to-face with chief executives and boards, and having the courage, rather than just being operational, which is very nice. And then we could go down a completely different rabbit hole of saying part of it is too many women in HR, and there's a particular female culture.
But it's also interesting that, I mean, marketing have exactly the same debate as a function that's going on here. So this is not unique to HR. But marketing people have the same issues to deal with. It'd be quite interesting to talk for both sides to talk to each other about it.
But I think it's very interesting. We've had this debate for 20, 30 years. Every time I hear a group of HR people, they always say, I'd love to be on the board, I'd love to be influencing people. It doesn't matter whether you imagine it'd be lovely to do something. The reality is a people strategy, a clear outline of how you are going to add to the bottom line, and the absolute courage to say no to people. I think that's absolutely essential.
I think there's a nice link back to the point you were making earlier about how do we as practitioners ask good diagnostic questions and take that slightly consultancy approach, whether it be in-house, working for an employer, or whether it is as consultants, and then finding the hooks. So in our business, in the organisation I work for, there's a debate that's going on about how do we drive momentum and performance, which is coming from the chief exec, because that's what they want to know. And lucky for us, the HRD is saying, well, isn't it about culture? That's the hook. And then we've got a huge inroad. So now we've got programs on culture, behaviours, values, and it's opened the doors because he understands that that could be a lever. So sometimes it's just about the diagnostic skills and the listening capability that are going back to basics and then finding those hooks, I think.
So, question for HR people, because I'm obviously not one. The studies and the case studies that show that highly engaged workforces have better retention, etc. Are there such studies that show when you have a senior HR person, are there actual stats and things that can speak to the bottom line and fulfill this?
Well, yes. I mean, if you take Gallup's organisation's Q12, yes, they do that because they would say there's two teams. So it's the team you're in and the team you lead. And you can track as you actually drive engagement through an organisation.
Sorry, I meant, is there proof and evidence that when you have HR people on the board, that company either performs better or there's real tangible stats to
Well, it very
make the
much
case.
depends on the HR person.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, putting someone on the board, it's a bit like people saying put women on board. It doesn't matter whether you put a man or a woman or an HR person on a board. It matters if you put an effective person who understands the business and how to drive the business.
And the dynamics of that top team, when we were talking about culture. So you're then into a group culture and a group dynamic.
I was drawing it back actually to Elva and I, where we started with 360 feedback. So I worked with Elva, I think it must have been about 18 years ago or 17 years ago back at SHL. And SHL's first 360 instrument was the IMC, the Inventory of Management Competencies. And all that time ago, we did a study with HR professionals looking at which of their competencies were ranked most strongly and which were ranked the least strong. And I think what's interesting and not particularly rewarding is that 16, 17, 18 years ago, the two bottom ranked competencies were strategic awareness and commercial awareness in HR people. And it sounds like what we're saying is things haven't moved on that significantly. And I think a more interesting question is, why are we still stuck in this same debate all that time later? I think almost everyone in this room would agree that in order to be really effective, HR people need to have a voice, be effective, be operating at strategic levels, be able to have commercial conversations with the business, and yet somehow this transition still hasn't been made successful. I think that's the interesting question to be debated, is what needs to change in order for that to happen. Because we all, I think in this room, passionately want to make a difference with the work that we do, and yet something is blocking it. And it seems to be the same stuff that was blocking it 15, 20 years ago. So drawing it back to sort of where Elva started with 360.
Comes to the last point, actually.
The final drum roll, please.
Which is develop yourself. And again, connecting to what Emilia was saying was, to work on yourself. You have to be the powerful leader yourself, and not just be thinking about other people's development. And it's being bold in your development, doing the 360, asking those questions, be strategic about how you do that. Even. So that's my last point.
With the current talent pool of HR directors, do we think that they can be developed and raise up to maybe the board? Or is it a problem that maybe now needs to be addressed at the lower levels, who maybe will be the HR directors a decade from now? I mean, is it too late for the current HRDs? In that, is there only a fine amount that can actually progress? Or, because if this issue has been going on for, say, nearly 20 years, then that tells me that the career paths that HR directors are on are not maybe, you mentioned about how HR professionals that have had that sort of cross-functional experience, and they're the ones that really sort of develop. Is this a problem? Is it that, people now are maybe going to come out of university, get a CIPD, go into a HR role, and then go up that path? I mean, is it a pipeline issue in general HR? What do people think?
I think it's a combination of, first of all, CIPD need to take a stand, and they need to do a bit more in terms of PRing the fact that it's beyond sort of looking at the administrative side of HR and personnel, because there is also a danger at board level, particularly in large organisations, that rightly or wrongly they still see the HR function as an HR function and a means of ensuring they get themselves out of hot water when they need to exit someone or deal with whatever issue, personnel issue they need to deal with. They need to understand that the HR professional has evolved, and actually they are more of the strategist, and the importance of the way in which their people development programme or whatever it may be that they run as initiative feeds into the general strategy of the business to move it forward. And I worry that, again, particularly in larger organisations, that they pay lip service to the idea, for example, of people development initiatives. You know, yes, fine, we're going through a culture change programme, we can tick that box, we're fine. We've got a load of training going on and coaching and mentors, and it's all lovely. But actually, do they understand what impact positively it's going to have? And I don't know whether that's the individual, the HRD that needs to be a lot more sort of gutsy about the way they put that across and make that link, or whether it's a combination of that and, as I say, organisations like CIPD being a bit more ballsy about it.
Yes.
Yes. So Elva came out and said, I've got 7 ways to make HR easy, and it sounds like HR got more difficult.
I did. I did.
Well, has anyone got any other questions to ask Elva?
But just to say that, Kate, I disagree with you. I actually think there is a change over the last 20 years in terms of HR's impact. HR has become far more professional, far more dynamic, and actually it's about HR's confidence to sit on the board and to drive the agenda as opposed to be part of the agenda. That is the real impetus that needs to happen. So do I think it's changed in the last 20 years? Well, I hope so, but I actually believe so, because I see it enormously in lots of different boards and see lots of organisations where the HRD is making a significant difference. So HR needs to stop beating themselves up about this issue. If you haven't got confidence to be on the top table, you will never be on the top table. I've known Elva for many, many years, and I think it's a great achievement in her book, but more importantly, that it really brings the essence of Elva out to all of us, and she is a very, very special person. So thank you, everybody.